Good morning, class. This is going to be the mini lecture for Chapter 7 in your Security Risk Management class, which has to do with information technology risk management. And I will start right off the bat this morning telling you that this chapter gets fairly technical. Now, because this is not an IT class, I'm not going to test you on the technical terms, but sometimes it's important, especially when material gets really technical and has a lot of terminology, that you read it and reread it a couple times to make sure you're understanding the terminology and the technical concepts. Really and truly what this chapter covers is what we've talked about thus far in the textbook. We're just applying it to information and information technology. Because not only do we have to secure the physical location of our facility and secure the people in our facility, but because everything today is almost done exclusively electronically, we also have to secure the information and the flow of information. Back in the old days, information security was simply putting a padlock on a file cabinet and then putting the file cabinet in a locked room, or even possibly having a vault to put sensitive information in. Now, those things still exist. We still do that, but because we have a lot of electronic information that exists on a company's computer server, as well as lots of secure information that traverses company to company, location to location, employee to employee, we also have to secure the information, the electronic information. So that's where we get the term information technology risk management. All right. So almost every facility that needs security has information technology systems, and as such, they cannot be left out of the matrix for security. You have to include your information technology in your security matrix when you are engaging in your target assessment, your risk assessment, your vulnerability assessment, in order to develop your management practices so that losses can be prevented or mitigated. You have to include information technology in that. If you leave information technology out, it could be a disaster for your facility. And you also have to understand that any attack or any threat to any other component of your facility could potentially affect IT security. I mean, if you have a bomb go off or tornado strike, that could destroy computer servers. It could open the location where the computers are up to the elements or up to theft or whatnot. So we have to not only focus on IT security, information technology security, but we also have to include it in everything else we do and understand that it is a critical piece of infrastructure for almost any facility at this point. Now we need to talk about a term, and this term is called convergence. Be familiar with it. Convergence is defined in layman's terms, not particularly for security risk management terms, but in layman's terms, it's the process of any two entities coming together. When you have things that start out apart and they're moving together and they intersect, that point of intersection is called convergence, or the point of convergence. Well, what we really have to do with security risk management using this process of convergence is when we have traditional risk management and information security or information technology risk management coming together. That's where we're going to be talking about convergence in the context of this particular chapter. With convergence, a comprehensive low-risk environment can be obtained. Now notice that I did not say no-risk environment. There is always some risk involved. You cannot eliminate all risk. But what we can do with proper planning, with proper assessments, and proper management techniques, policy and procedures, and practices, we can obtain a low-risk environment. And that's where convergence comes in regard to information technology risk management is that we've got to identify what are the critical pieces of our information technology infrastructure. Make sure they're secured first. It's just like anything else. You identify the critical things that either would result in the largest losses or the most greater likelihood of experiencing a loss, and focus on those first, and then put your energy on the rest once those things have been secured. So by doing that, we can obtain a low risk environment. So the objective of information technology risk management is to enable the organization to accomplish its mission by better securing its information. I mean, think about this. You might not be vulnerable physically. You may have a highly secured facility. Nobody can get in or out unless we know about it. And maybe you have done a really good job of vetting. Okay, guys, sorry about that telephone call ringing. When IT calls, you need to answer. That's actually who was calling. I had a technical glitch this morning myself, and or at least I thought I did, and I had called IT, and come to find out it was a problem on Calhoun's end. It wasn't my end. So either way, I apologize for that interruption. So we have to secure the information. What I was talking about was you may have a highly physically secured facility. You may have done an excellent job of vetting your personnel so that you know that the personnel are not going to be jeopardizing the security of your facility. But if you don't protect your information, you're leaving yourself open with a big hole in which somebody could attack you, somebody could hack into your system, somebody could steal your information or steal your customers' information. If you remember, think about just around Christmas time and just after Christmas, we saw the big issue at Target stores where somebody hacked into their system and stole a lot of customer debit card information and identifying information, so basically left those customers open for identity theft at that point. So don't discount information technology security. You have to be able to do that, and because you have to be able to do it, you have to go through the process of looking at your targets, assessing them, looking at your vulnerabilities, assessing them, looking at the potential risks of losses, assessing them, and then developing a management strategy to put those into practice so that you are fully secured. So don't forget to understand the difference between assessment and management when it comes to risk. Assessment is when we are determining what our risks are and how large they are and what priority they should take. And management then is putting into practice policies and procedures that will lower that risk. So assessment is determining what the risk is. Management is actually engaging in behavior that will lower said risk. Okay, so the first thing we need to do in regard to information technology is to identify the assets. They must be identified and classified the same way we identify and classify assets of any other type for the facility that we've already talked about. Whether it be in the physical location, what are the physical things that we consider big assets? That if we lost this is a big deal. Or if we lost this, it puts a damper on our production or puts a damper on our company, but we can still work. But just think, nowadays, if your computer system goes down, almost everything comes to a standstill. My wife's into extreme couponing, and so I went with her to the grocery store Saturday, and she had her cart full of stuff with her handful of coupons, and I had my cart full of stuff with my handful of coupons, and I checked out just fine. Mine worked great. When they started entering her coupons in, the system crashed. Too many entries or something or other. And it took 30 minutes she had to wait in line 30 minutes for the system to come back up so that they could continue to scan her coupons and see how much money she was going to save. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to that point where we walk out paying zero, but pretty close. But that just shows you that even at a grocery store, if the computer system goes down, then brings everything to a standstill. Luckily, it was only the standalone checkout computer. It wasn't the whole mainframe of the grocery store. If that had happened, it would have probably been catastrophic. I guess she would not have gotten that cart full of groceries. So IT assets must be identified and classified at the outset, and that means first. You got to identify and classify them first. You can identify IT assets as both hardware and software, and also digital information. Hardware is the actual pieces of computer equipment. That would be your computers, your servers, anything that you use to pass or document or print information could be considered hardware, or store information could be considered hardware. Software is the programming installed on that hardware that tells it exactly what to do. That's your system, if you will, is the software. So not only do we want to protect the equipment, but we protect the programming within the equipment. Typically the software is what becomes an issue if your system gets hacked. And then once we input employee information or production information into the system, and the software is doing what it's doing in order to process that information, then that digital information is also considered an asset. So digital information might include sensitive business data, results from testing, secret recipes. If you're Kentucky Fried Chicken, now I will tell you that Kentucky Fried Chicken keeps their recipe, a hard copy of their secret recipe with 13 original herbs and spices or whatever it is, a hard copy of it in a safe at an undisclosed KFC corporate location. However, some locations, some facilities, some entities might store that on what they believe is a secure server. So that would be considered sensitive business data. Or if they do research and development, results of said research and development could be considered sensitive business data. Personnel information. That's going to be the identifying information for all your employees, dates of birth, social security numbers, direct deposit info, which is a bank account numbers. If you work for the government, you have direct deposit, which means the government maintains a huge database of account numbers and routing numbers from where or to where they send pay, monthly or weekly or however they do it, for all those employees. If that information gets hacked and somebody steals it, then somebody could very easily go into those bank accounts and drain those bank accounts, and you've just suffered a huge loss. And if the government or the entity is the one whose security had the issue, then they're going to be liable for those losses. Customer information, that's something else you don't want to get out. That's usually protected information for most retail companies, is that they have certain loyal customers and they do not want to lose them to other competing companies. So they don't want anybody to steal that information. They may have suppliers, which are also customers, that sell them the raw materials they need to make whatever the product they're making, and they don't want some other company being able to utilize the same supplier. So just understand that there are several components to digital information that must be secured as part of IT security. And we also secure authentication information, and that's basically login information. That's the way that most IT platforms are vulnerable, is because we allow so many people access into them by having a set of credentials to log into the system in order to manipulate, pull off add to or change information on the system, and if the authentication information gets out, then somebody can just log into the system and get whatever they want to get out of the system, and it's going to look like it was an employee doing it instead of a hacktivist, if you will. So you will have to decide the importance of each asset and prioritize each asset within the IT infrastructure. You're just going to have to do that. That's just like you do with any other part of the facility, of the corporation, of the company. You're going to have to prioritize the importance of each asset. Secure the ones first that either would result in the largest loss or is the most likely to be attacked or likely to be unsecured or whatnot. Those are the ones you need to focus on at the top of the list, and then once you've got those, then move down at that point. Okay. IT risk assessment is the first process in any risk management methodology, and it seeks to determine the likelihood that a threat will successfully exploit a vulnerability and the resulting impact if that exploitation occurs. What I'm saying is we go through the same process of risk assessment in IT as we have with any other asset that we've identified with our facility. You have to determine the likelihood that that asset will be exploited, and whatever the impact is. And that's just another way of saying exactly what I just said. How likely is it to be attacked, and what's the amount of losses if this particular asset is impacted. On page 136 to 138 of your textbook, there's a list of terms: confidentiality, availability, exposure. Make sure you're familiar with exposure. Countermeasures. Make sure you're familiar with what countermeasures are, what criticality is, hybrid assessment, integrity, qualitative and quantitative assessment. I apologize again. Hang on just a moment. Okay, so we have to, I was talking about these terms. Make sure you understand qualitative assessment and quantitative assessment, threat, vulnerability, and risk. And also on page 138, it talks about asset value, exposure factor, annualized rate of occurrence, and single loss expectancy. This is the technical part of this chapter where it really starts to get into there's some mathematical formulas here, and I'm not really concerned that you know how to do that mathematical formula at this point, but I want you to understand that formulas exist that help us to look at exposure, and exposure is a big one in regard to risk management. Exposure can be defined as an instance of being exposed to losses from a threat. A weakness or vulnerability can cause an organization to be exposed to possible damages. Exposure is, think about it this way. If it's cold outside and you go out there with guys, if you go out there with a Speedo on, or gals, if you go out there with a bikini on and it's 10 degrees outside, you're exposed and you could possibly suffer losses. But if you have on the same clothing, but you put on a big coat over it, or you put on more clothing on top of it and you walk out in the cold, you're not nearly as exposed and you're protected. Think about risk assessment is figuring out where your exposure is, and risk management is covering that exposure. And there are ways to do it, scientific and mathematic ways to calculate how much exposure, how much risk you have, based upon the value of the asset and your exposure factor. Basically, that's the priority of on your list of how important that asset is. So the value of the asset plus and the likelihood that it would or could be attacked or the amount of losses associated with it if something were to be compromised there. So again, the rest of this, a lot of this chapter does contain some technical terms. You probably need to read this chapter 2 to 3 times. And of course, if you have any questions, any issues with it, with understanding something, reach out to me in course messages, and I'll be happy to talk you through that. Threat assessment in regard to IT. Any threat to any other system in a facility is also a threat to any IT system. And I talked about that earlier. A human threat. If you have bad people coming into your organization, then they may be coming in to work in production, but they may have an ulterior motive of breaking into the IT system to get some piece of information. That has been done before. It will probably continue to be done. So that's a human threat. An environmental threat. If you have a tornado strike a facility, they could theoretically destroy the whole building along with the IT system and infrastructure. And then if looters come in, they could steal. The computers and sell the data or whatnot. Natural threats such as anything else that's not a human or environmental threat, I guess we would consider a natural threat. Earthquake, a flood, something like that. So all critical IT systems should be protected against fire damage, water damage, extreme temperatures, humidity, power failure, and unauthorized access. And these are very, very broad. What do you consider unauthorized access? I mean, it may be that somebody has authorized access to the facility or to the IT system, but they have an ulterior motive, and therefore they're still causing you losses. So I guess in theory we would call that unauthorized access because they're doing it for the wrong reason, but on the surface looks like they're just fine. So you have to be on the lookout for that as well. I mean, anything that could possibly cause you a loss in any other aspect of your business can also cause you a loss in regard to the IT infrastructure as well. Vulnerability assessment. Assessing the vulnerability of the information technology system is critical to the mission. On page 144 in your textbook, there's a table there I want you to be familiar with. And it's called Table 7.2, Security Criteria. And it looks at management security, operational security, and it looks at technical security. And it gives you some criteria to focus on in each one of those. So be familiar with that criteria associated with management security, operational security, and technical security. Management security is going to be basically the security of the personnel. Operational security is the security of the operation of the business, and of course technical security is the security of the information infrastructure. So again, the rest of this chapter is pretty technical. Please read and reread it over again to make sure you understand the major components. If you have questions, please reach out to me. From a simplistic perspective, this chapter basically from big picture says secure your information every which way you can. When you really start drilling down, though, it's having you look at all the different aspects of the IT infrastructure that needs securing, how you go about developing that prioritized list, and then putting some management practices in place to help secure that. So if there's anything in this chapter you don't understand, again, please reach out. It's a little more difficult in an online class. You have to kind of go get some of this information yourself, but I'm trying to explain it to you in these little mini lectures to at least give you a better way of looking at it, so maybe you're not so confused. All right, guys, have a good week. I'll see you in discussion boards, and then I'll see you in the mini lecture again for Chapter 8 next week. Just remember, next week, Chapter 8 will also be your midterm week, and you're going to be tested over everything from Chapters 1 through 8 at that point. So I would highly suggest going back and continue to read and reread over each chapter at this point. look at the discussion board postings, look at key terminologies and key concepts and things of that nature. So have a good week, guys. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.